Yeah, I'm telling HR people, embrace the bathroom stall. Like take that captive audience that you have because they're sitting there pooping and put the information there. I mean, like it is one of the best ways to communicate, I think, that we often overlook because it's like, ooh, poop. But I seize it, use it.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast. If you're a professional looking for innovative, thought-provoking information in the world of human resources, this is the right podcast for you. Rebel HR listeners, I'm extremely excited for our guest today. Her name is Kate Bischoff. Kate is an employment attorney, a speaker, and an HR consultant. She has an energy and enthusiasm about HR, and she just wants to make companies better and not just compliant. Welcome to the show, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. We're excited to have you. You've got some great content out there. We were talking earlier before I hit record. I love lawyers. They make my job so much easier. And I think many HR professionals probably agree with that. So why don't we start off? What prompted your love for human resources and employment law?
I like every HR person I know, or most of them I know, I kind of fell into it in that I went to law school hoping to represent teachers and students against school districts for freedom of speech issues. Because in your neck of the woods, one of my favorite people on the planet is Mary Beth Tinker. And she had protested the Vietnam War as a middle schooler, I want to say. And her case got all the way to the US Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court held that students have a First Amendment rights to express themselves in schools. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to represent the Mary Beth Tinkers of the world. And I found out there's no money in that. And I have to feed my family and I have to keep a house over their heads, or a roof over their heads, I should say. So I got a job working as a law clerk for a plaintiff's law firm. And in the very first week, I was holding the hand of a sexual harassment victim at trial.
Wow.
And I fell madly in love with it because it was helping people make workplaces better. I felt like I was doing the right thing. Like sometimes it just clicks that you're doing the right thing, and that all just kind of clicked. So I did plaintiff's work for a while, and then my father, who is a small business owner, wanted some return on his investment. And so I went to work for one of the largest labor and employment firms in the country before taking the next big step into human resources, which was to join the Foreign Service and become an HR officer for Consulate General Jerusalem and then U.S. Embassy Zambia before returning home. So I really got to see all of what HR does in those roles overseas with challenges that we don't normally get to see as human resources. For example, in Zambia, the life expectancy was 43 when I was there. So in the 15 months I was stationed there, I lost 15 employees to HIV, AIDS, or car accidents. And for Americans, that was really hard because that's not normal. Like it's not normal to have that kind of death surrounding a workplace. But for Zambians, it was normal. That had become their normal since AIDS really took off. And so our goal as an embassy was to reduce the incidence of AIDS, help improve life expectancy. And then my job as in human resources was to work on succession planning and cross training, because if you get sick in Zambia, particularly with AIDS, you get sick on Monday and you may have passed by Friday. So it's not like we're keeping jobs open with leaves. It was making sure we can still operationally do what our goal was, which is to represent the U.S. to the Zambian people and hopefully make their lives better. So,
Wow. I mean, what a difference from our typical normal.
yeah, I'm really not normal in any way, shape, or form, Kyle.
In the best way.
Well, you are an employment attorney.
So.
I think that's so interesting. I've got to believe that was just one of those life-changing experiences that just completely reshaped your view of the world.
Oh, for sure. I look at my time in the Foreign Service both with heartache because I missed part of it, but also as it gave me a perspective on people in general, in how to handle conflict. Because in Jerusalem, the Middle East conflict affects every decision you make as a human resources professional, whether it's, am I going to use Arabic as a primary language? Am I going to use Hebrew as a primary language for this position? All of that stuff gets wrapped in. And so once you're seeped in conflict like that, I think you develop some pathways of how to handle it. And that has given me some really great tools for being a lawyer, because a lot of what we do as lawyers is handle conflict. And while I'm not in the courtroom anymore because I choose not to be a litigator, but I am still managing conflict for my clients and helping them figure out what the best strategy is to reduce conflict and from an employee relations standpoint, and then also, make things suitably uncomfortable so that we can move forward as an organization.
I love that.
Absolutely. So, did you find that conflict was something that you naturally could handle well, or did you have to develop coping mechanisms as you're going through some of these experiences? How'd you manage that?
uh, my father would say that I am naturally inclined to conflict, that I seek it out.
Okay.
I would say probably not. I mean, I do live in the Midwest and we hate conflict in general, right? We're just passive aggressive about it. But I will say that I'm not afraid of conflict anymore as I was probably before. Now I see it as we have this dissonance that we can smooth out in a lot of ways. As long as we agree on a same kind common ground of values, that these are the values that we share, so we can kind of overcome any conflict because we believe in the same things. So for a lot of my clients, whether it's doing training on respectful workplace or it's doing an investigation, it is getting down to what do we all believe so that we can see the truth in something or we can get over this area of conflict.
So I'm curious, and now I see that your current role is an attorney and HR consultant at Thrive Law and Consulting. So, what made you take this step into more of a consultative role? And is that your private practice?
It is. It is my private practice. It's just me. I am at my dining room table currently, and that's where I spend most of my time. Um, it was twofold. One, I was at a firm that had not had a traditional employment practice before. And so when I wanted to do things that were not necessarily the norm, straight billable hour stuff, I was constantly asking for permission to do XYZ things that were out of the norm, like going to speak at a conference or doing a compliance review with no cost to the client, or doing things that were unusual for this particular law firm. And that was getting to be frustrating, that I was constantly asking for permission for things. The great firm, that part of it got frustrating. The second part of it was my kids. My ex-husband was about to have twin children, and my kids were still kind of in this place where they needed a parent to be with them more often. And I looked at them and went, I need to be around you a lot more than I am right now, working, 7 to 5. I need to be around a lot more. And I went, how can I figure out a way to be more flexible so for them, but also be able to do the kind of work that I want to do? And so going out on my own was really the best option, and I don't regret this decision for a second. It's been almost 4.5 years, and I live in a house. It's warm in here, even though it's really cold outside. They're fed, they have most of their needs met. So I'm calling this success at this point in time.
That's awesome.
Gotta
Good for
say, I
you.
love the name.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I love the name of your business, Thrive with capital HR.
Thanks.
Do you
Thank
primarily
you.
work with small business? Do you work with large business? Are you all over the place? Where are you at?
Well, I try to avoid working with large business. I
Okay.
know that sounds crazy because that's where the big money is, but when I'm working particularly with a general counsel who does not have an employment background, I'm spending so much more time educating them on what the status of employment law is. And if you've met a general counsel who likes to learn from other lawyers, please introduce that person to me because I'm not sure they exist. And so I feel like I can make a bigger impact at the small and medium sized business. And I mean medium sized business at 3,000 employees or less. So most of the time I can provide that on the spot kind of, oh shit, Kate, can I fire this guy question to, reshaping how we do recruiting so that we build a better funnel of talent that includes our the folks in our communities so that we are representative. So all of those issues I think I can handle better at the small and medium sized business as well as making an actual impact on my community.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I often hear people say, and it kind of amazes me, but I'm just curious about your perspective and if you see this, but I feel like there's some HR people that believe that they are there, they exist to represent and protect employees, period. And then there's some HR people that believe they are there and they exist to protect business, period. Do you see that, or what's your thoughts on that?
I think the answer is yes. You have to do both though. So you have to straddle that fence and maybe get that fence pole all the way up your butt. But that is really where we sit. We are the face of management to employees and we are the face of employees to management. And so because we have to straddle it, it makes it really difficult to have super good friends at work because,
Mhm.
if you have to discipline your friend, that's hard. If you have to fire your friend, that's hard, whether that is management or not. But because we have these two faces, we have to be super strong in what we believe in is the right thing and bend when necessary, but have a titanium spine when our organization or employees are doing something that we don't think is the right thing to do. So I'm part of the two face, whether it's from Batman genre or not, but that's kind of where I fall. We have to do both.
I love it. Deep cut. Batman reference.
Kyle.
And I'm
No,
not
I would
even a
agree.
DC fan. I'm much more Marvel.
Oh, I'm Marvel all the way, but
Yeah.
For sure.
we could talk about that for another 3 hours. That's probably not on topic. Sorry, Molly.
No, that's okay. No, I would agree. Very strongly believe that we are both, and I have found that the only way you can do that in HR is to build the relationships with people at all levels, so that way you can gain their trust and maintain their trust. So for me, that's what I have found to be key in that both position.
I 100% agree with you, Molly. And for a lot of my clients, they have worked really hard to build that credibility with folks. And then they bring me in when they can't use that credibility. So,
Hmm.
for example, one of my clients has a CFO who might be sexually harassing someone. And so while she knows she could do the investigation, she doesn't want to be put in a spot where she's recommending his term because then she's using all of the credibility she has gained in that role and advocating to terminate her peer, which doesn't feel good. And there'll be blowback on her if she's the one who makes that recommendation. So she brings me in to do the investigation so that I can use my credibility because I've got all those fancy letters of ESQ and all the stuff behind my name. So I'm already the scary lawyer. So they're more likely to believe me and I can use my credibility with them that comes naturally, whereas she's had to work for it for a long time.
How do you help an HR person or give them advice in a way where you have to get them to understand you have to push back a little bit once in a while in that particular situation? You have to have some backbone. A lot of times we see HR professionals, especially some of these young ones that are graduating from college and want to get into HR because they like, butterflies and rainbows and employee engagement. But we all know the truth behind HR. It's a dirty place.
Uh-huh.
Patrick, your job's not all butterflies and rainbows.
Not since March 6th, Molly.
I would say. I am an excellent cheerleader. I don't wear the outfit, but I am an excellent cheerleader. And it is not unusual for me to put together the bullet points for my client to go talk to management with or to talk to employees with. My clients have some of the biggest hearts out there, and sometimes they see that it's wrong, they just don't know what to do next, and so then I am their sounding board and I provide them that script of what they need to say next. And it's not always the legal reason as to why they should do XYZ. Sometimes it is the legal reason mixed with the public relations issue or the employee relations issue on top of it. So, for example, I have a client who a couple of years ago was about to implement new drug testing protocol. And they were debating back and forth, were they going to do the 5 panel or were they going to do the 10 panel? And she didn't want to test for weed because she knew she had a bunch of employees who did weed regularly. It didn't affect their jobs at all, but she was afraid that if she put this into place, that she was going to lose a bunch of employees. Well, she got overridden. They were going to do the full panel with weed as one of those things. And the first time one of these employees got pulled up in a random, she's like, "Oh, this is going to be so bad." And he tested positive. And when she went to management and said, "Hey, he tested positive. What do you want to do?" Their response was, "Well, we're going to let him go." So then she came to me and she's like, "Well, what do I do here?" And I said, "Well, if we let him go, what are the other relationships in the organization that he could affect that could also leave? Could he gut your entire IT department? And is that something you want to do? Is this a position that you absolutely need to be drug testing for? Do you have a legal obligation to be drug testing these folks?" So it came down to what is best for the organization. And I gave her those talking points to effectuate what she wanted to happen, which was to put in some parameters of, "Hey, I don't care necessarily what you do in your off time, but if it ever affects the workplace, you're gone. And yes, you got called up in this random, but I'm afraid that if you were high at work ever, you're going to be let go immediately because of this positive test." So it was kind of, giving her the right information, giving her the pep talk that she can do it. And with that equipment and those tools, she was able to get the results she wanted.
Well, I was just say I had an issue one time. Oh my gosh, one of our best employees, we did random drug tests as well. He was called. He had come to me before we got the results and said, "Hey, I want to do the right thing. This is going to come back positive." He was trying to do the right thing. Well, we
Oh,
got the test results and it was negative. Oh, that one aches my heart. Like,
oh,
he was trying to do the right thing.
Whoops.
Definitely called my attorney on that on that one, but that was a struggle for me.
yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I like that, the honesty up front. I appreciate, but
Yes,
if
I've learned
you
since
met me
then.
in real life, you would know that if I did marijuana, it's going to stay in my system the whole time. So it'll be there forever.
I've learned now when somebody walks in my office after that, I don't want to hear, I don't want to know. Let's just wait for the results.
Yeah. Yep. We'll talk again.
That it almost seems like people forget, or when you work in HR, that there's a perception thing as well. Like how
Mhm.
employees, general employees, view you and view the department, how you're handling situations. So you may be, for those of you younger HR professionals out there, if you may be hesitant to push back or make a decision, and that's your own personal inner battle you're dealing with, you got to remember it's not just you or your department. You're looking out for the workplace. It's a perception that you're giving to your employees as well, and it creates common practice in how you're impacting the organization. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When I do respectful workplace training, there's one example that I require all of my clients to do, which is these two people, they finish a project, they go to happy hour to celebrate. Back when we could go to happy hour, they go to happy hour to celebrate. They start following each other on the social medias. She posts some risque photos of herself and tags him in them. A coworker sees it because it's on social media and brings it to me in human resources. And in the example, I have two volunteers, one plays her, one plays him. And when I and I play traditional HR, like the stereotypical HR lady. I've got two cats, a lot of coach bags, and I live by myself, right? The stereotypical HR person. And so when I ask the one of the characters to come to my office, I ask the crowd, what is their body doing right now? And they're like, oh, probably sweating, probably a little incontinence, right? Because they're going to HR and we fire people and we like it. That's our reputation. And while so many of us are out there working so hard against that reputation, we have to also embrace it and understand that that's how people respond to us when we call them into our office or we stop by their desk. They're initially that anxiety happens in them, and we have to know that and work really hard against it so that people feel more comfortable coming to talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously a lot has gone on in the last year between this pandemic and politics. I'm assuming that your business has just skyrocketed. Am I correct?
I've been busy, yes.
Yeah, you've probably been very busy. I'm curious, a lot's developed, but I'm curious one of the recent employment law developments that have made you go, what's your take?
Oh, that's a really that's a really good question. Um, so I have my own podcast, and my podcast partner Mark and I prognosticate about what's going to happen in a Biden administration. And I got like one or two things wrong about a Trump administration, but I was generally pretty right, or at least where things were going. In the Biden administration, I think I'm pretty close to being right. I think the thing that is going to be or is going to have the biggest impact on HR is a robust National Labor Relations Board. We have a new acting general counsel right now who has withdrawn a bunch of things that have happened during the Trump administration NLRB. And I think we're going to see some just warm cuddles for the labor industry. And we're going to see unions try to come back with a vengeance, I think. And that's going to be a challenge for a lot of employers, particularly employers who still use command and control as their management style. I think that one has been obliterated in 2020, if it wasn't already. And building those relationships, as you mentioned, Molly, of having trust your folks, give them the freedom to do their thing. I think for those organizations who've been able to embrace that kind of culture and management style, they might be more immune to unionizing activity. But in the most anti-union state, in the most anti-union employer, we're seeing a union campaign right now. And I think we're going to see that happen more and more over the next 4 years.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And this as being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Patrick and I both work in manufacturing. Molly has worked in manufacturing. I know that's one of those areas that it really hasn't been top of mind with the recent administration. It'll be interesting to see if the opportunity for unionization continues to shift. And we've seen a little bit in our local area, maybe not necessarily full on drives, but certainly some noise in that aspect of some of the areas. And I think some of it too, I'm curious on your perspective here. Some of it too, I think, comes from social unrest and people feeling
Mhm.
that wages aren't fair, and there continues to be economic challenges, and not just economic challenges, but a huge difference between people at the top of the economic ladder and the people at the bottom. So do you think that's also going to trickle into some of the things we see in the regulatory world?
I think you're 100% right there. I can't quote it 100% correctly, but I think if you looked at the late 1960s, early 1970s, the percentage difference between what the CEO made and what the line level worker made was like maybe 200%. It's now like 2,000 or 200,000%. And that disparity makes a really good argument for a union to come in and say, I'm going to raise your wages because this guy makes way too much money. So I think the opportunity is there because of the social inequities we have in general. And I think part of my favorite realization that corporations have taken, particularly in the last year, is the role they play in our communities on a larger scale, that they can have an impact on things like social inequity, like racism. And while they should have known that they've had that role for a long time, I think many of them are taking a bigger step into that realm for the betterment of their communities. And I think part of that is going to be, if you're not doing that, if you're not seeing the social corporate responsibility that you should, someone is going to make that decision for you, whether it is your customers or whether it is your employees are going to make that decision in a form of a unionizing drive. So I think there's definitely room for that, and I think it's going to happen.
Molly, Patrick, what do you think about unions? I want to put you
Um,
guys on the spot.
I mean, I think they have a place for sure. I think they've done a lot of good. It kind of depends on what perspective I'm looking at. I would agree with kind of what Kate said is if management is working hard to create that culture where a union isn't needed, I think that would be ideal. Um, with that being said, when I came into HR, I was very naive to the fact that employers and business leaders were all doing common sense things that are just right in nature. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
as I've been more tenured in my career, I have seen things that people have done that just doesn't align with some of that. So I also understand where and how they come about and where their place is.
I agree with you. I come from an industry that has had a huge amount of animus towards unions as a whole. And I believe that in those particular employers, the employers are doing the right thing. It how the union is trying to articulate it isn't the best way, but we have more holidays, we have PTO, we have leaves, and that has grown out of unions in a large way. And to the extent that we need to continue to build on that, we should. I think we should do it more from a policy perspective rather than a unionizing perspective. But whatever gets us to a place where we can see the humanity in each other and be better for our communities, I want that.
Completely agree.
I love that perspective. I think it's interesting for me to think about the progress that's been made because of the disruption that's been created through social unrest and social movements and things that were very uncomfortable at the time for people in business and people in power to wrestle with, but in the rear view mirror, I think we would all agree, wow, those things were really, really necessary, as uncomfortable as they were. And so I wrestle with that fact a little bit because I personally, I want to build a workplace that people don't feel like they need a union to be
Mm-hmm.
heard and to be seen as worthy and be treated fairly and all those things. My passion is I want people to feel that they don't need somebody representing them. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting. It's an equation that I tend to go one way or another on.
That's why I got into HR, not the sole reason, but that's one of the many reasons I gravitated towards HR when I left my last organization. Because my staff in corporate dining, they were actually a union staff. I had 7 or 8 cafes throughout multi-site facilities here in the Cedar Valley, and I won't name the business we were in, but you can guess. Um, and it was 4 different union contracts. So I felt like every year I was having some sort of union negotiation. I couldn't reward my employees or promote them without red tape or even do it at all, according to some contracts. The contracts weren't aligned. I felt like I didn't have any control to create an impactful workplace environment because everything had to go through the union. And that is one of the reasons that I started looking to get away from that type of industry and just, general, management, I guess, to focus into a particular profession. And now in an environment where we don't have unions, and I do have control and my voice does matter to our leaders, I think you can see the impact within our organization, our culture throughout the country. And not that I'm completely against unions, I'm open to the conversation, but back in that day, I just didn't feel like I had any control to just support the workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all worked in a place where the person sitting next to us or working next to us wasn't towing the line, wasn't doing what they needed to be doing, and we grew resentment toward that individual person. Well, when management can't do anything about it because there's a union involved, that just creates a ongoing cycle of toxicity. So it's if you're going into a union setting as an HR professional, your first job is to build credibility with that union steward so that when you need to do something about it, that union steward is going to go, oh, well, Kate's not usually weird or off the wall about her stuff, so that we can, even in a union environment, set the standard that these are the expectations. We're going to hold you to those expectations, and we're going to hold each other to those expectations. So I think that is a tough balancing act, particularly for HR folks who come from command and control kind of places.
Yep, I agree.
Along these lines, same with kind of unionization and then also politics and people taking change into their own hands. I think a hot topic we get a lot and we see HR individuals question is, and employees for that matter, what employee speech is protected in the workplace and how can HR leaders manage that?
Oh my gosh, Molly, I have just gotten out my super large soapbox. Are you ready? I'm going to get
I'm
on top
ready.
of it now.
Do it.
There is no such thing as freedom of speech in the workplace unless you're a government employee. There's no such thing. When I get on my soapbox and I start spouting out my truths that I am superior to all other people, including Black and brown people, I should get fired for that. And I should get fired for that immediately. If I get on my soapbox and I talk about how women should be barefoot and pregnant in the workplace, in the kitchen, and not in the workplace, I should get fired for that. Employers have an obligation to keep their workplaces free of harassment. And that may mean that their folks who have taken quote unquote political positions need to go because of those harassment pieces that they make. Particularly in the last 4 years, I think employers have learned the lesson that this idea that diversity of thought is the best thing ever, and that's where we should rest our diversity efforts on. Well, if somebody's different thoughts are based upon people not being equal, or some people are not, or subhuman, that they are, then you get to get rid of them, and you should, because otherwise you're just inviting legal issues and PR issues and recruitment and retention issues that are going to plague you forever. And that comes down to this idea of differing values, that if we all have the same values in our workplace, we can overcome that conflict. But if our values are not aligned, I don't need you to be in my workplace, and I shouldn't have you in my workplace in a lot of ways. The politics of it has been that, I should have Republicans and Democrats working for me. Absolutely. You absolutely should. There are some states where making decisions based upon political views would be prohibited. California. But if that is a different in alignment of that we all are deserve to be given a chance at work, then I'm out here. The only kind of real speech that is protected in a workplace is whether or not that it's called concerted protected activity, and it means that employees are binding together to try to improve the workplace for themselves, or complaining about terms and conditions of employment. If two employees are talking about how their manager Joe is just such a dick, well, that's concerted protected activity. It's not concerted protected activity if we don't like him because he's Black. So there is a difference. The NLRA has a little carve out, but it boils my hide when people tell me that there are First Amendment protections at work, because I'm like, not in my workplace, like not here. So I love it when they try to make that argument, but I'm like, Congress shall make no law. That is the language of the First Amendment. It's not my employer has to listen to me all the time. That's not the rule.
So when are
Where
you
does
getting
Black
licensed in
Lives
Iowa? When can we hire you?
So I'll answer Molly's questions first, Patrick. Sorry. Black Lives Matter was determined by the Trump administration to not be a political speech, so that it is not a political movement. Even the Trump administration said that. So when people want to wear Black Lives Matter stuff at work, that's not political speech. It is. I'm hoping that your organization believes that everyone is equal and that all people have an opportunity at your workplace. So Black lives do matter. So that's not necessarily something you can let them go for. But this idea that to weaponize Black Lives Matter into this abhorrent political speech, I think, is something we're going to have to come to terms with, because Black lives do matter.
I have a question. What controversies are you dealing with around the hot topic right now? A hot topic, one of them, the COVID vaccine.
COVID
Which
vaccine?
one, Patrick?
I was going to say, like, we're on crisis upon crises over here, right?
You gotta be more specific.
So COVID.
About
Right.
about employers being able to offer it in places.
So remember when I said that I want corporations to understand they have a role in our bigger community to do the right thing?
Mhm.
My clients are more likely to mandate vaccines for that very reason than they're likely to just encourage it. And I mean mandate with the obvious exceptions of religion and disability. If I can't take it because of my medical condition, my clients are not going to penalize you for that.
Sure.
But they're going to take the stance of, we need to take this because it's better for our community if we take this. So that's where our starting point is going to be. There are some quirky legal perspectives here, particularly around the idea of wellness incentives, because arguably vaccines are a wellness initiative. And I mean, but in the before times when we had a flu shot clinic, that was seen as, we want to keep you well, right? So COVID vaccine kind of falls into that wellness perspective as well. There have been some new-ish kind of legal perspectives on what an employer can do to incentivize wellness. That you can't give more than 30% of the cost, because then it's not voluntary anymore. I think the EEOC is going to relax those a bit for vaccinations because they understand the importance of it. I mean, if the EEOC can relax the rules around asking if you are currently sick in a job interview, they're going to relax the way we're going to get out of this pandemic too. So that's my prediction. I know it's a hot topic, but I want everybody who can be vaccinated to get vaccinated because then I can go see a James Bond movie in the theater. Um, because I've been waiting for that thing for 4 years now, and my patience is at its end.
You're speaking my language. I wanted to see, the new Top Gun, and it didn't come out, and that just ticked me off.
Yep, yep.
That really surprises me.
Top Gun, Patrick. I'm gonna get you some
Yeah.
aviators for the next show.
Oh,
you need
boy.
aviators for the Biden administration, period. So
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah.
That surprises me because everything I'm seeing and hearing is kind of the opposite as far as encourage it, but not necessarily mandate it. And I am particularly surprised that there's a lot of nursing facilities and hospitals and medical organizations who are not requiring these, and that's really surprising to me.
It is really surprising and it breaks my heart a little bit. I mean, I understand their argument that the vaccines came out too fast and we haven't done enough testing. We don't know what the long term effects are, but we also don't know the long term effects of COVID either. And you know what? I like living. I'm a big fan of that. And I would like my family to continue living. I would like my community to continue to live. And when I look at our neighbor over there, either of the Dakotas, and knowing that they've killed 1 in 500 people with COVID, I'm like, that is not a reality I want to be in. I know more than 500 people in the Twin Cities, and I don't want them to die. So I think we're going to see such a vigorous rollout of it that hopefully by the summer, most of us who've wanted it will get vaccinated. And then it's going to be up to the social pressures to get the rest of us. And for some communities, clergy is going to be really important to get us there. And others, our biggest influencer is our employer. And so I think employers have a role in making sure that it can get out to people. And if that is just setting up a clinic in our lobby so people can come get vaccinated, that makes it easier for people. And that can be the encouragement. Because, unless the flu shot was offered, I might not go get it on my own. But if it was just right there, then maybe I do.
Absolutely. And just, maybe a call to action to any HR professional listening to this. Every jurisdiction is drastically different. At my company, I've got a few jurisdictions where I can actually apply as an employer to get on the list and get my employees on the list because we're an essential employer. And so my advice would be go take a look at your local health department, see what the rules are, see if you can get on the list. Start to figure out, how do I do this like a flu clinic? Even if you're not mandating, there are ways to increase access to folks. And I'm with you, Kate. Like I like to be alive as well, and I like to do things that don't involve sitting at home watching my 3 kids scream at me about which Netflix movie they want to watch. So yeah, let's go watch James Bond. Let's go do Top Gun. Get a shot in your arm, people.
When you talk about,
Yeah.
Education, I think the hard thing that our employees hear is only what they see on the media. I think we need to take that education back as HR department and really try to educate to the science of the vaccines. A lot of times we'll hear employees say, well, they're only 90 or 95% effective, depending on which one. Well, that's our responsibility to say back to our employees, well, you know what? The flu vaccine each year generally is about 30% efficacy rate. So you get your flu shot every year. This is, I understand the vaccines are new, but something's better than nothing. Okay.
Yeah, I'm telling HR people, embrace the bathroom stall. Like, take that captive audience that you have because they're sitting there pooping and put the information there. I mean, like, it is one of the best ways to communicate, I think, that we often overlook because it's like, ooh, poop. But seize it, use it.
It's
I
very
love a good
effective.
poop joke, Kate.
It's crazy how effective those bathroom posters are.
I just found the title and the snippet for this podcast just in the last few seconds. That's perfect.
Happy to help in any way I can.
Oh my gosh, Kate, I sincerely appreciate this conversation. We could keep talking for hours, but at that point, I think you'd probably have to start charging us an hourly rate. So I would like to kick off the Rebel HR Flash Round.
Okay, hit me.
All right, brace yourself. Here we go. Question number 1. What are you reading right now?
I am reading Think Again by Adam Grant because I am fascinated with how we can change hearts and minds to make the world a better place.
I love Adam Grant. If
Mhm.
anybody doesn't follow Adam Grant that's listening to this, first of all, I'll be surprised, but he's awesome. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I
I'm
have not
even
read the
willing
book.
to. Yeah, I'm willing to overlook his work in Silicon Valley, but because I think it is really important. So
Absolutely. All right, question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
well, I could be real selfish and say the Hostile Work Environment podcast with me and Mark. The other thing I think we should be listening to is you should change the channel.
No, I love that. I mean, and I just saw it was an infographic and it showed like it ranked different news organizations on the scale of truth and
Mm-hmm.
left-leaning versus right-leaning. I'll see if I can
Mm-hmm.
find a link to it and put it in the show notes. But it's pretty eye-opening to realize, wow, I thought I was getting unbiased news and I was getting left-leaning, partial
Mm-hmm.
truths, like opinions.
Well, but and to a certain extent, I mean, I think Nicole Wallace, who is a former press secretary for George W. Bush, so she has been Republican for a lot of her career on MSNBC. I really enjoy her. So I feel like it's a little bit more balanced than probably on that scale. But turning to CNN, turning to ABC Nightly News every once in a while really does help, I think, try to get a broader perspective. So
I love that. That's a great answer. All right, last question. How can our listeners connect with you?
ooh, easy. So I am addicted to Twitter. So Twitter is where you can find me the most often, whether it is pictures of my cat headbutting me because she's in a cone, or whether it is my hot takes on whether to evaluate someone's sincerely held beliefs for religious accommodation. You can find that all on the Twitter. I'm at K8BISCH. Or you can also find me on LinkedIn, where sometimes I go into a little bit longer diatribes. But those are the two main places you can find me.
Sounds great. We'll have all that in the show notes. Kate, thank you so much again for the time and the wonderful conversation and approaching life with a humor and a passion. I think that if you are going to survive in HR, you got to have a little bit of both, and sometimes humor has to be a little twisted. That's just kind of what it
Yes. Embrace the poop joke, people.
is. Embrace the poop jokes. Thanks again, Molly and Patrick. As always, thanks for joining us, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.